From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie Beneath the Planet of the Apes, released in 1970. The synopsis is, this is the unexpected sequel to a very successful movie, The Planet of the Apes, released in 1968. The story. The Planet of the Apes, released in 1968, originated from the 1963 science fiction novel The Planet of Monkeys, published by French author Pierre Boulle. An astronaut from the future travels to a planet where apes have evolved to become the dominant species, and humans are primitive creatures. Film producer Arthur P. Jacobs bought the rights, and Rod Serling, best known for the television series The Twilight Zone in 1959, initially translated the novel, and Michael Wilson was hired to rewrite Rod Serling's screenplay and was given the main credit for the film. The film ends with the main character, Taylor, who believed that he was on a strange planet, discovering that he was actually on planet Earth the whole time, and mankind destroyed their own world with nuclear weapons. It leaves the viewer with the sense that Taylor and Nova, his female companion in the movie, can give the human race a new start in the Forbidden Zone, where they end up. Pierre Boulle wrote a sequel screenplay entitled Planet of the Men in French. 14 years later, Taylor organized a human uprising against the apes. The budget was a huge issue for 20th Century Fox, possibly facing bankruptcy at the time. The first hired director walked off the project over that issue, but television director Ted Post was brought in and figured out how to tighten the budget. The imagery of the first film's ending was used for inspiration to start the story. As well, Rod Serling, who was too busy to write the screenplay, contributed to the idea of underground ruins and an atomic bomb. Archer Obler revised the screenplay among many contributions, including the new star of the film, James Franciscus. They could only procure Charlton Heston, the star of the original movie, for a limited role. The story revisits many of the same beats as its predecessor. It isn't as nuanced and loaded with subtext as the first story, but it's still there nevertheless. However, the last third of the film serves up a fresh dish of intrigue, surprise, and a lingering message about war and nuclear war in particular. The pacing, at an hour and 35 minutes, it may not have been the best pacing, being uneven at some points and a little awkward. However, it's short and tells a story that goes by pretty quickly. The challenge. The challenge in this story is the same as the last movie. Intelligent apes keep humans oppressed. What's accentuated more is fear of what's out in what is called the Forbidden Zone. In the original movie, Taylor has ventured out into the Forbidden Zone with Nova. Dr. Zaius, the antagonist in that movie, calls off the military apes from following, since there have been several unsuccessful expeditions in the Forbidden Zone. Dr. Zaius is one of the head law keepers with a specialty in science. The Forbidden Zone is a threshold where the apes have ventured and have experienced strange hallucinations that prevent them from advancing. Eventually, the military apes began to suspect that something or someone is trying to keep them away. A bloodthirsty gorilla, General Ursus, convinces the city to let him lead his army into the Forbidden Zone and face whatever's out there by force. What a juicy character! Now, the word Ursus is Latin for bear, and he looks like one too, being intimidating, but also he uses mental strategy to manipulate his contemporaries, including Dr. Zaius. You get the feeling that his aspirations are for more than just being a general. He's loud, boisterous, and very impressionable on screen. I loved his flashy character and what he brought to the story. Dr. Zaius reluctantly agrees to oversee Ursus's expedition with the foreboding inkling that he might not return to Ape City. His part is not as juicy as it was in the first film, but he does help the army break through the mysterious illusions. The second challenge in this film appears in human form, survivors of the fallout of nuclear war that have mutant powers now. This is the biggest new exciting introduction into this sequel. They are able to make humans and apes see illusions, hear sounds, and do things that they don't want to do. For the most part, they live peacefully among themselves in the bowels of what the apes call the Forbidden Zone. With such developed mental powers, it seems they are quite weak and have no other defenses, so any intruders of any kind are viewed as a threat to them. Another layer of fear for them is that they have abducted apes before and know what the apes can do if they ever knew about them. What's even more disturbing is that they have no loyalty to fellow humans and view them as possible traitors. The fear has isolated them and kept this society from getting help from humans that they have encountered and has left them vulnerable to any ape attacks. One thing that keeps them passive against tactical war is the fact that they also have what is called an alpha omega bomb that is at the center of their society and that they pray to as if it were God. Now, I remember being totally freaked out when I saw this. I always imagined that perhaps this religion began as a group of surviving scientists that trained their children to look after the bomb, and it got so twisted into some sort of religion over generations. It's truly fascinating how this might have come to pass, much like the mystery behind the evolution of the ape society as well. This alpha and omega bomb is not just a bomb that can wipe out a city, but destroy the entire planet. They plan to use it as a last resort if the apes reach their city, which indeed they do. Though the mutants are the most dangerous challenge, they are not as smart as I would like them to be. After knowing for years that the apes could possibly attack them at any time, and even being able to catch a few of them, they fail to plan an escape or a tactical defense if their psychological tricks didn't work. And why didn't they use their powers to have the apes shoot at each other, as they were clearly able to do that? It may have been that they were too fearful. Fear is the main cause of the challenge in this film. Now, the empathy in this film is not very strong, but it's still there. There's still quite some empathy. As I said before, the film begins where the first movie ends, with Taylor and Nova exploring the Forbidden Zone. This scene is actually recycled several times to pad out the runtime, affecting the pacing. And that was one of the big problems of the film. But it was used to try to retell that part of the story. Taylor, at this particular time, suddenly vanishes into a mirage, leaving Nova wandering around on a horse. At the very same time, a spaceship crashes, and the only surviving astronaut is John Brent. Brent is a character meant to resemble Taylor, but he doesn't have the same pessimism against humanity. Brent finds Nova, who takes him directly to Ape City. He has an excitement and a curiosity of where he is and what happened to Taylor, in the same way that audiences were interested in Taylor because he was fanatical about looking for answers about this ape world. It works because Brent continues in Taylor's footsteps, eventually finding what was left of intelligent human life and the disappointment of finding that the humans in Ape City are all mute. Wisely, he does not tip off that he can speak. He also learns that the apes can talk and receives help from Cornelius and Zero, two chimpanzees who helped Taylor in the original movie. Then he too discovers that the world is actually the future of Earth, mirroring a similar response. As I mentioned before, the film does tread Taylor's adventure, almost beat for beat, but quicker. Nova is very much as she is in the original, but her connection to Brent and Taylor is stronger as she does her best to support them. In the last 15 minutes, Taylor appears as a prisoner of the mutants, and and just when you think, you're like, oh yeah, Taylor's back, and you begin to root for Taylor, Brent, and Nova, the story turns itself on its head by killing all the characters pretty much. Now the technical aspects. The world of the Planet of the Apes was matched with many of the outdoor scenes shot on the Fox movie ranch in Malibu, sharing backgrounds with the MASH TV series. There were lots of recycled materials in the film, like the Mutants Council Chamber was actually a redressed set from Hello Dolly, released in 1969. And vice versa, sets for this movie were used for other 20th Century Fox productions like The Land of Giants in 1968, Beneath the Sea in 1969, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes in 1972. I was very impressed with the ruins of New York. Having been raised there, I love seeing the ruins of the subway station, the New York Public Library, the New York Stock Exchange, and Radio City Music Hall. Now, in the film, it makes all of these famous landmarks pretty much all in one spot, but they're quite a bit away from each other in proximity in the city. Another victim of the budget was the makeup. Only key characters were actually fitted with makeup, but all of the extras were given masks. Unfortunately, these lesser makeup tactics were more prominent in this film than maybe they should have. There was actually a scene featuring a half-human, half-ape child that was going to be included into the film. There were even makeup tests that were done that ended up looking quite creepy, and I think we're all in agreement that the scene was wisely removed. I remember being very shocked at seeing the makeup for the mutants when I was a kid, because it looked like their skin was see-through. As shocking as it was, they were going to make their afflictions even more graphic than it was in the film. I think making the makeup more subtle made it seem more plausible. It was just enough to freak you out, but also not so that you lost your lunch. Many astute viewers have compared the death of the mutant Albina to a famous painting by the name of The Death of Marat, and it definitely looks very similar. The production was much simpler than the first film, but they put enough energy into the film to tell the story with some decency, so I really appreciated it all. Now the performances. The big question that many ask about this film is, why isn't Charlton Heston's character the main character of the film? Well, Charlton Heston did not want to be part of the movie because he had a strict rule not to be in any sequels. He also thought that the story was pretty wrapped up by the end of the first film, and he was right. But after much convincing, he agreed to take the role as long as it was shot within a 2-week period. He negotiated that he would film the beginning to set up the story and then disappear. Taylor would then reappear close to the end of the film and die. To make peace with breaking his own rule, he donated his salary to charity and is only on screen for about 18 minutes. Despite not wanting to be there, he did not phone in his performance. Those 18 minutes were pretty amazing. Burt Reynolds was first considered for the lead role of John Brent, and this was during the time just before he filmed Deliverance, released in 1972, but it didn't work out. So they moved on to James Franciscus, who is lesser known by modern audiences, but at the time he was very well known for his work on TV and movies, including one classic, The Valley of Gwangi, in 1969. Just looking at him, you can tell that the filmmakers felt like they struck gold because of his strong resemblance to Charlton Heston, which is remarkable. James Franciscus played the part with a desperate, frantic energy, and to tell you the truth, his dedication in playing Brent was seriously, indeed welcomed. With all of the strange things that are happening in the story, it's so great to have something that anchors the audience to reality, and I appreciated that. Maurice Evans, famous for Rosemary's Baby in 1968 and as Dr. Zaius in The Planet of the Apes that same year, reprises his role, bringing grounded legitimacy to the Ape Society. He was great. Kim Hunter also reprised her role in the film, but it also took a great deal of persuasion for her to return because she hated wearing the iconic makeup her character had to wear. She doesn't appear for very long, but she puts in a great performance that matches her character in the very first movie. Linda Harrison reprised her role as Nova, and I thought it was the perfect opportunity to expand the character she played. Although I wished that they did more with the character, at least she was consistent, and it was great seeing her return. Roddy McDowall had a scheduling conflict, so he was not able to reprise his role as Cornelius. It is the only film in the original series of the 5 that he is actually not in. It was, however, for a noble cause because he was in Scotland directing his own film, Tam Lin, released in 1970. The film did use a clip of McDowall as Cornelius in the beginning of the film as a flashback of a memory. He was such an icon of the movies that his portrayal of Cornelius is often pictured in the media for this very film. David Watson was hired to play Cornelius. His performance was really good at mimicking McDowall's, and that was very important to keep Cornelius's spirit consistent between the two films. Great job. And when I was a kid, I didn't notice the difference. Orson Welles and Ernest Borgnine were considered for the role of General Ursus, and I can see why. James Gregory was cast, and he fit the same acting category of someone with a large presence and a commanding voice. He was perfect for this role with his intimidating charisma. Natalie Trudy, wife of producer Arthur P. Jacobs, made her very first appearance in the Apes cinematic franchise in this movie. She played a mutant in this film, a scientist in Escape from the Planet of the Apes 1971, an ape love interest in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes in 1972, and in Battle for the Planet of the Apes 1973. Now my enjoyment. After going through this adventure with Brent, Taylor indeed makes an appearance. Simultaneously, the apes attack the city, brutally slaughtering every mutant. They kill Nova. Brent is mortally wounded, and so is Taylor. But with lost hope, Taylor is the last survivor and uses the Alpha Omega bomb to destroy the world. Now, my goodness, what an ending. The ending of this film is probably the most shocking of the two films, which is what the filmmakers intended to do. It works very well when you think of the tone of the first film. It is a downer, but it leaves so many questions. I thought that Taylor was extremely selfish for destroying the planet full of life still on it. There were lots of innocent humans and apes in Ape City. In fact, there were mostly lots of creatures on the planet and many other life forms still in existence in other parts of the world. Zira and Cornelius were out there, to his knowledge, at the same time. So why did he do it? My assessment is that he didn't want the apes to win. He just simply didn't want them to win. Taylor never really loved the Planet of the Apes with good reason. He was treated poorly and his space crew was gone. They had basically butchered all of those guys. And in the first film, he called it an upside-down civilization. He was angry at humanity in the first film as well. Nova was his last connection to humanity, and when she was killed, he lost his humanity. There was nothing left for him, and that is why he destroyed the world. And the filmmakers had an alternative ending written where Taylor, Nova, and Brent escaped the bomb, which was a device that killed off the mutants and apes. They returned to Ape City and helped Zero and Cornelius release the humans from their cages and begin a new combined civilization together. Hundreds of years later, the lawgiver teaches ape and human children together. The final shot of the film would have been a mutated gorilla that emerged from the underground shooting a flying dove. The scene was partially resurrected in Battle for the Planet of the Apes in 1973. Beneath the Planet of the Apes became a huge success, landing the #1 spot at the U.S. box office when it was released and spent 2 weeks as the #1 top-grossing film in 1970. Charlton Heston claims that he personally suggested destroying the world in order to kill the possibility of more sequels. For a time, the franchise seemed to have met its end. However, the studio wanted to exploit the idea further, and where there was a will, there was a way. And the writers for the next film, Escape for the Planet of the Apes in 1971, figured out a very clever way to continue the story. A close friend of Zira and Cornelius, a scientist by the name of Dr. Milo, retrieved Taylor's ship from the sea. He studied it and repaired it during the events of the first film, and the three escaped the Planet of the Apes just before it was destroyed. The apes accidentally travel back in time to the planet of humans, so to speak, and bam, the Planet of the Apes is back in business again. I was still am very impressed by how this was achieved, because for sure, Beneath the Planet of the Apes felt like it was the final chapter. This series of films are incredible. The original Planet of the Apes 1968 was added to the National Film Registry by the United States Library of Congress, so its impact on culture has been well recognized. After the three films, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes was released in 1972, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes was released in 1973 to complete the quadrilogy. The last film also wonderfully left the story off in such a way that you could watch The Planet of the Apes, the 1968 version, right after. There was a TV show in 1973, a Marvel Comics magazine, and an animated series in 1975. There was a remake in 2001 by Tim Burton, and then a new series of films in 2014 that enjoyed a pretty good run. I love these films, and it will be my honor to eventually review all of them one day. This is clearly not as compelling as the first film, and much of this had to do with the limitation of budget and Charlton Heston's availability on set. They still managed to put together a good story of events and a poignant theme about fear and how it can affect humanity. It was a warning against war and the threat of nuclear war in particular. That's one of the beautiful things about this story, and ultimately the Planet of the Apes franchise. It points a magnifying glass to mankind. It's a very important story to tell, and I just absolutely adore it for what it is as a continuation of a beloved franchise. My rating is a 7.4. Well, that sums up my review, guys. I hope you liked it, and if you did, I've got over 100 of these videos, so go on ahead and browse the channel to see more reviews from me like this. I do regular live streams, so look out for those, and I hope you can join the conversation. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon to be the very first to see my next video. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.